If you were looking for the ultimate heartthrob of Soviet cinema with Jewish roots, Andrei Mironov would be one of the most obvious candidates. Not because the Soviet Union ever had an official ranking of male beauty. There was no such ranking. And the phrase, "millions of women were crazy about him," is not a statistic, but a description of his public image. Mironov was called a nationwide idol and the dream of millions of girls, while his films attracted tens of millions of viewers. But this answer immediately raises a second question. Andrei Mironov was not born Mironov. His surname at birth was Meneka. His father was Alexander Semyonovich Meneka. His mother was Maria Vladimirovna Mironova. So the story of the most handsome Jew in the USSR almost instantly turns into another question. How accurate is it to call Andrei Mironov himself Jewish? There will be three different verdicts, that of the public, that of the Soviet system, and that of ancestry. And they do not entirely agree. The public's verdict. Andrei was born in Moscow on March 7, 1941, although his parents registered March 8 in his official documents. His parents were well-known variety performers who appeared together as the duo Mironova and Meneka. Their partnership later developed into the famous Theatre of Two Actors. In 1958, Mironov entered the Shukin Theatre School. In 1962, he graduated with honors and joined the Moscow Theatre of Satire. He'd already appeared in films while still a student, but his status as a public favorite did not come from a single movie. One of his first major successes was the comedy 3+2. In 1963, it was seen by around 35 million people. Mironov played Roman, a veterinarian and a young, ironic hero in a holiday comedy. This was not yet the Mironov whom audiences would later recognize from a single intonation, but his audience was already enormous. Then came Beware of the Car, Property of the Republic, Unbelievable Adventures of Italians in Russia, and The Straw Hat. Mironov became increasingly skilled at combining comic timing, musicality, physical grace, and the ability to play a self-satisfied, handsome man in a way that allowed the audience to see both his charm and his ridiculous side. And in 1969, The Diamond Arm was released. During its first year in cinemas, it was seen by 76.7 million viewers. Mironov played Gennady Kozodoyev, Gesha, a smuggler and fashionable dandy who constantly tries to look more impressive than circumstances allow. His physical attractiveness was not merely decoration here, it was part of the comedy. The song about the island of bad luck, the white trousers, the confident holiday resort manner, the almost dance-like way he moved, all of this reinforced the image. But Mironov never became trapped by a single handsome role. He played Ostap Bender in the television adaptation of The 12 Chairs, the minister-administrator in An Ordinary Miracle, Mr. First in A Man from the Boulevard des Capucines, and Figaro on the stage of the Theatre of Satire. He performed as a singer and also directed productions himself. So the first verdict is understandable. If by the most handsome we mean not an objective title, but a figure who existed in popular culture for decades as the image of a charming, elegant, desirable man, then Mironov is certainly one of the strongest candidates. And his attractiveness was part of his profession, not a substitute for talent. And here I would briefly ask you to support the video with a like and subscribe to the channel. And in the comments, tell us whom you would personally call the greatest male heartthrob of Soviet cinema, Mironov or someone else. But if the first verdict came from the public, the second appeared long before his great fame, and it had nothing to do with his looks. The Soviet system's verdict. During his first school years, Andrei carried the surname Meneka. This matters not merely as a family detail. In the late 1940s, the Soviet Union launched a campaign against so-called cosmopolitanism. Officially, the rhetoric targeted rootless cosmopolitans and Western influence. In practice, the campaign acquired a pronounced anti-Semitic character. Jews were dismissed or demoted, Jewish cultural institutions were closed, and the destruction of the Jewish Anti-Fascist Committee became one of the darkest symbols of that period. The Mironova-Menaker family did not live outside this reality. The biographical profile on the culture.ru portal directly connects Andrei's change of surname with the struggle against cosmopolitanism. It also states that Alexander Menaker was forced to leave the theatre of variety and miniatures, and that in 1950 he decided to give his son his mother's surname so that the boy would face fewer problems finding work in the future. Andrei himself was about 9 years old. He had not yet chosen the theatre, applied to drama school, or gone through professional film auditions. But the adults around him already understood that a surname could affect his future. And it is important not to oversimplify this. Alexander Menaker did not abandon his own surname. The parents' act continued to be called Mironova and Menaker, and they performed together on stage for decades. So it would be incorrect to claim that the Menaker surname was completely banned within the family. But their son became Mironov. The family could continue its public career while simultaneously taking a private precaution to protect their child. In the Soviet system, Jewishness was understood not only in religious terms, but also as a nationality, an ethnic category. That meant that even a completely secular person could encounter anti-Semitism because of ancestry, family background, or surname. This is the context that explains why the surname of a 9-year-old boy had practical significance for his parents. The public, however, came to know him as Andrei Mironov. But the family line did not disappear. His father, Alexander Semyonovich Menaker, was born in St. Petersburg into the family of lawyer Semyon Isakovich Menaker. Museum records document this branch of the family, while Jewish biographical sources identify the Menakers as the Jewish side of Andrei Mironov's ancestry. In other words, the discussion of his Jewish roots is based neither on the sound of his surname nor on an internet legend, but on his documented paternal ancestry. We've reached halfway through this story. If biographies like this matter to you, stories in which a familiar Soviet name reveals a far more complicated family history, support the episode with a like and subscription. And tell us whether you already knew that Andrei had been a Menaker during his childhood. But now we reach the central question. The Soviet system could define ancestry in one way. Jewish tradition defines it differently. First, what can be stated with confidence? Andrei Mironov was the son of Alexander Menaker. On his father's side, he had Jewish ancestry. Therefore, descriptions such as an actor of Jewish descent, an actor with Jewish roots, or the son of a Jewish father are historically accurate. The statement, Andrei Mironov was Jewish, however, depends on the criterion being used. Under traditional Jewish law, halakha, Jewish status is inherited through the mother, or acquired through a recognized conversion to Judaism. A father may be Jewish, a surname may be Jewish, and a person may have connections to Jewish culture, but paternal ancestry alone is not sufficient for traditional halachic Jewish status. According to published genealogical records, Maria Vladimirovna Mironova came from the Mironov and Fyrsov families. The historical database Memory of the People lists her nationality as Russian. No evidence that Andrei Mironov underwent conversion to Judaism was found in the verified biographical materials. Therefore, describing him as Jewish in the strict traditional halachic sense would be inaccurate. At the same time, Jewish identity cannot be reduced to a single criterion. Some branches of Reform Judaism recognize paternal descent under certain conditions. There are also cultural, familial, and ethnic forms of Jewish self-identification. But applying any of these models retrospectively to a Soviet actor without reliable evidence about his own religious self-identification would also be inappropriate. So the main answer comes not at the end, but right now. The title, The Most Handsome Jew in the USSR, is acceptable as a striking formulation as long as the audience is immediately and honestly told that the subject was a man with confirmed Jewish ancestry through his father. But the title should not be interpreted as a precise statement about Andrei Mironov's religious legal status under traditional halacha. This is not a minor technicality. It is precisely what makes the story more interesting. To the public, he was Mironov, a star, a heartthrob, an actor recognizable by his voice and movements. To the Soviet reality of the late 1940s, he was also the son of Menaker, a child whose surname was enough to make his parents think about his future. To Jewish tradition, Jewish ancestry through the father alone does not determine halachic status. 3 verdicts, and each one tells us not only something about Mironov, but something about the era itself. After the answer. What is especially interesting is that changing his surname did not automatically make his career easy. In 1958, Mironov secretly applied to the Shuchukin Theatre School while his parents were away on tour. 4 years later, he graduated with honors. From 1962 until the end of his life, his main theatrical home remained the Theatre of Satire. The theatre, more than anything else, shows why reducing Mironov to a handsome face would be unfair. He played Figaro in The Crazy Day, or The Marriage of Figaro, for 18 years. He did not merely perform on stage, he also worked as a director. His range in film expanded as well. In An Ordinary Miracle, his minister is a charming cynic and opportunist, while in Alexei German's My Friend Ivan Lapshin, Mironov played the journalist Karnin in a much more restrained and dramatic style. His final major film role was Mr. First in A Man from the Boulevard des Capucines, once again drawing on his musicality, comic talent, and ability to command attention instantly. The film was seen by around 60 million people. The scale of his popularity can be measured at least indirectly, not by the number of letters from female admirers, which is difficult to turn into reliable statistics, but by the size of the audiences for his films. 3 + 2, around 35 million viewers. The Diamond Arm, more than 76 million during its first year. A Man from the Boulevard des Capucines, around 60 million. None of this proves that every viewer came specifically to see Mironov, but it does show how deeply his face and voice entered Soviet popular culture. In 1974, Mironov received the title of Honored Artist of the Russian Soviet Federative Socialist Republic, and in 1980, he became a People's Artist. His public image retained a sense of effortless lightness. Songs, comedies, elegance, rapid-fire lines. Behind that image stood theatre, cinema, television, variety performances, and constant touring. The final chapter of his life requires no invented cinematic detail. On August 14, 1987, the Theatre of Satire was touring in Riga. Mironov was playing Figaro, a role he had performed for 18 years. During the performance, he lost consciousness before reaching the final part of the play. He was taken to hospital. On August 16th, Andrei Mironov died without regaining consciousness. He was 46 years old. His final film was A Man from the Boulevard des Capucines, released that same year. It created a painful coincidence. The actor died at a time when his screen image was still associated with movement, songs, jokes, and tremendous energy. And this is where the story returns to the first verdict. People can argue endlessly over whether Mironov was the most handsome man in Soviet cinema. That is subjective. You could name Vyacheslav Tikhonov, Oleg Yankovsky, Vasily Lanovoy, Alexander Abdulov, and the argument would never end. But in Mironov's case, there is an additional historical layer. He was born Andrei Menaker. His father came from a Jewish family. At the height of the late Stalinist anti-Semitic campaign, his parents changed their son's surname to his mother's. A few years later, under that surname, he entered theatre school. then the theatre of satire, and eventually the homes of tens of millions of Soviet viewers. The country saw Mironov, above all, as an extraordinarily charming star. The history of his family reminds us that behind one of the lightest and most festive images in Soviet cinema stood an era in which ancestry was anything but a light subject. The most accurate conclusion is this: Andrei Mironov was one of the great Soviet heartthrobs, with confirmed Jewish roots on his father's side. Calling him simply Jewish, without explanation, is too crude for the complex history of his family. But forgetting the Menakas simply because the entire country remembered the surname Mironov means losing an important part of that history. If you value this kind of discussion about Soviet and Jewish history without myths or oversimplification, subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and share the video. And tell us in the comments, does the story of the Menaka surname change the way you see Andrei Mironov? Or for you, does he remain first and foremost a great actor?